Okay, so the last three chapters, 35, 36, and 37, we were basically talking about the importance of action. And we said a few points. One thing we said is that we brought different metaphors. The first metaphor we brought was a candle. The human being is the candle. The divine energy, the divine fire, the divine presence is like fire. That's a metaphor from the Zohar. And the fire needs fuel. So you need something to keep God in this world. And the Zohar says that the fuel is action, which is surprising because you would think, what is the fuel to bring spirituality and God into the world? You would think maybe it's the soul, or maybe it's spiritual meditation. But no, we say that the fuel is action. The Zohar doesn't explain, or Rabbi Shneur Zalman explains, because what is fuel? Fuel has to dissipate. It has to be completely consumed by the fire. Now, the human being, even the soul, is not completely consumed within the fire. In other words, a person retains his own identity. Even someone who loves God, even if the soul loves God, it still feels itself as something independent that loves God. So that can't be fuel. That's disqualified for fuel. So what is fuel? Fuel is action, because the energy invested within the action becomes completely spent within the action, and that becomes a vehicle for the divine will. For the fuel, that becomes fuel to keep divine energy in this world. That's what we said in chapter 30, 35. And then in 36 and 37, we say, look, what's the purpose of creation? Purpose of creation is not for the soul. It's not for the spiritual worlds. Purpose of creation is to make a dwelling place for God in this physical world. And the way that is done is through action, because it is specifically action that bringing God into the action that affects the physical world. And then we spent chapter 36 and 37 explaining how when all the Jewish people collectively over history, when they will fulfill all the commandments, what they are doing slowly but surely, they're transforming the energy of this physical world through the action. And at some point there's a tipping point and the concealment is gone and everybody will sense the presence of God, which is basically the Messianic era. So that was 37, 36, and 37. So we had three chapters talking about why action is the most important thing in Judaism. Now, this is all true. And we start 38 by reiterating and re-explaining and proving that action is primary. However, we say, like in Judaism, like everything else in Judaism, is also the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin, as intention, is also important. What is intention? What do we mean by intention? By intention, we mean why am I doing the mitzvah? I'm doing the mitzvah because I want to be connected to God. So that feeling, the spiritual feeling of love and awe and wanting to have a relationship with God and wanting to feel close to God, that is what we mean by intention. Because what is the intention of doing the mitzvah? I'm doing the mitzvah to connect to God. So if I do the mitzvah just mechanically, according to 35, 36, and 37, wonderful. I bring God into my life because I have fuel for God. Now the divine presence could rest upon me. I'm transforming the world, and wonderful. Why do I also have to create that emotion that I really want to feel connected to God? What we will call intention. So here 38 says, one second. However, despite the fact that everything is true that we said, that action is primary and action is what brings the world to its purpose, which is bringing the divine light into this world. So we're going to say intention is also important. And now we have to figure out what is the definition. Why is intention important? And it's quite a long chapter. So I think we'll read it in the other version, not with the version that we usually read it, which is also interspersed with commentary. I think we'll read it in the other version, which is more condensed, maybe a little more harder to understand. But in general, it's a very long chapter, not so easy to understand because it gets Kabbalistic. But we're going to say that, look, indeed, we bring God into this world through action. But if you want to reveal that, if you want to see and you want to sense God's presence, which is also important, for that you'll need the intention. And when you do a mitzvah with intention, you're bringing additional light into this world. And this entire chapter is going to go into describe how that works in the sort of the Kabbalistic mechanics of what the intention does for the mitzvah. And this is just a preview to next week, because next week also in 39 and 40, we're going to get very Kabbalistic, probably the most Kabbalistic chapters in the first section of Tanya, the first 53 chapters. And basically, we're going to start talking about spiritual worlds. And later in chapter 40, we're going to talk, in 39, we're going to talk about how different, we already started now, but we're going to elaborate next week, but we already touch upon it this week, different degrees of intention allow the mitzvah to connect to different spiritual worlds and bring that awareness into this world. So we're going to get a lot of Kabbalah in the next 3 weeks. So you have to fasten your seatbelt and try to understand everything as much as you can. I'll be very honest with you and make a confession. I'm not sure I understand everything here in these next 3 chapters, but the journey continues. So we're trying to understand it and feel it and connect to it. But the big idea, what's the big idea? The big idea is, yes, you make a dwelling place for God, you make a home for God in this world through action. But if you want additional light in that home, think of a metaphor. You build a home, but the home, God came into your home, but the home is dark. You're not necessarily going to feel the presence of the light. But the more intention the mitzvah has, the more awareness of the divine presence you'll feel in this world. And that is also important, because that is also the divine will to bring light into the home, not just to create a home. So we're adding a dimension, because we said the purpose of creation was to make a home for God, correct? But the way you make a home for God is through is through action, but the way you appreciate it and you see it, and the way you turn on the lights, so to speak, is through intention. And once we establish that, we get into it's a detailed discussion of exactly the mechanisms of different types of intention. We're going to get into the 4 spiritual worlds that correspond to the 4 different forms of matter as the Greeks understood them. Doimim, inanimate, tzameach, vegetation, chai, animal, medaber, human. So we're going to talk about all these and talk about the various levels of intention and what they contribute to the mitzvah. So that's the introduction. Introduction is short. The chapter is long. It's a little Kabbalistic, like I said. Next week is going to be even more Kabbalistic, but we'll read it and we'll see how much we understand. But the point here is, if you don't understand something, don't wait to the end, because there'll be more things you don't understand. So better to jump in earlier rather than later. Okay, so if you're still here, I didn't scare you off, then you are very brave. So thank you for being brave. Oh, Bob joined us, so I'm going to give a 30-second summary to the 10 minutes to the 10-minute introduction. The 30-second summary to the introduction is that even though in chapter 35, 36, 37, we spoke about how important action is, because action is what builds the home for God in this world. 38, 39, and 40 is going to say, nevertheless, intention is critical. Why is it critical? Because yes, action brings the divine light brings the divine presence into this world. But if you want light, if you want awareness of that home, you're going to need intention. And you're going to need kavanah. Kavanah is Hebrew for intention. But when we say intention, you're going to need emotion. You're going to have to do the mitzvah with the intention to connect to God. And that's the dance that we're going to do in these chapters, right after the last 3 chapters, which we kept insisting that action is primary. And we're going to continue that theme, because that's what the beginning of 38 does the same, proves from the halacha, from Jewish law, that action is primary. Nevertheless, intention brings additional light. And like I said, it's very Kabbalistic. It's going to get worse next week, more Kabbalistic. But it gives us it gives us the Kabbalistic mechanism of what exactly the light does. So I'm going to be brave this week. We're going to look at the other translation, which is a more formal, literal translation, because I think it's shorter and it's a busy day today, in the sense that the holiday of Sukkot is coming, a lot to do, and the chapter is very long. So we're going to try to read it, and whatever we understand is good. Whatever we don't understand, we'll understand on the next round when we'll learn Tanya in depth, God willing, at some point, because God is going to give us all. God's going to give us all long life and peace and serenity, so we'll be able to study a lot of Torah. Go ahead, Bob.
Good morning, Rabbi. Thank you for that summary. Did you orchestrate this to be on Sukkah? Because isn't going to the Sukkah supposed to be an intentional mitzvah as opposed to eating matzah on Pesach?
You want the confession? I did not orchestrate it, but God did. So there it has. So Bob is saying a very interesting point. most mitzvot in the Torah says do it. The Torah doesn't say why to do it. Mitzvah, sometimes Shabbat, for example, it gives a reason. But there are very, very few mitzvot, and Sukkah is one of them. And the Torah says, sit in the Sukkah. Why? Leman yedu dorotechem, so your generation shall know. And that leads the codifiers to say that when it comes to all mitzvot, the intention is the cherry on the top. It's nice to have intention. You fulfill the mitzvah without intention. In other words, you fulfill the mitzvah even if you don't have intention, but intention is a bonus. When it comes to the mitzvah of sukkah, however, Bob is correct that the codifiers say that because the Torah says, sit in the sukkah so that your generation shall know, so the awareness and awareness of the message of the sukkah is a critical part of the mitzvah. So the knowing is not the intention. The knowing is the mitzvah itself. So that obviously that's the idea of intention, and that's very consistent with chapter 38. So I did not orchestrate it. Not only I didn't orchestrate it, I didn't think of it. So thank you, God, for orchestrating it, and thank you, Bob, for pointing it out. Okay, I think we're ready to jump right in. I'm just going to excuse myself for a second because I do have the plug, and it is plugged in, but it just jumped out of the wall. So we're going to have to put it back into the wall because it's not enough to have the body, which is the hardware. You also have to have the soul, which is the energy, which is the electricity, as we will see, as chapter 38 is going to point out. So this is a case in point. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, here we go, 38. We'll see how this goes. The first sentence, the first paragraph is going to say something fascinating. According to Judaism, if you do the action, you fulfill the mitzvah, even if you have no intention. If you have the intention, you didn't do the action, you did not fulfill the commandment. And we're going to say the same is true, even prayer, which you would think prayer is all about intention. Even Shema, which you would think is about awareness. No, even then, it's primarily action, and we're going to prove it from the halachic sources, with some exceptions. But we're going to arrive at that conclusion. So the beginning is reiterating what we was proving and reiterating what we said earlier. Says Rabbi Shneir Zalman, in the light of all that has been said above in the last 3 chapters, one will clearly understand the decision of the halacha, Jewish law, that has been laid down in the Talmud and codes, that meditation is not valid in lieu of verbal articulation. So that if one recited the Shema only in his mind and heart, even with full force of his concentration, kavana, he has not fulfilled his obligation, and he is required to recite it again orally. So I'm saying the Shema. I know it's a mitzvah to say Shema twice a day, but when I said the Shema, I didn't verbalize it. I just had the intention. You say, wonderful. The guy has the awareness. He meditated. He loves God. Everything's wonderful. We say, no. If you have not verbalized it, you did not fulfill the obligation. You have to repeat it. Similarly with the grace after meals, which is ordained by the Torah. And with other benedictions ordained by the rabbis, all other benedictions are from, all other blessings are rabbinic. But in any case, so in other words, both the biblical commandment, which is saying the Shema and the grace after meals, as well as rabbinic commandments, which is all the other blessings and prayer. So in other words, just intention is not going to suffice. You actually have to verbalize, and if you didn't verbalize, you have to repeat it. On the other hand, if he has uttered them with his lips, but did not intend with his heart, he has fulfilled his obligation ex post facto. In other words, b'di'evet. It's of course better to have intention, but if you did not have intention, and you just read the words, you fulfilled the obligation, and he is not required to repeat them. There's one exception, except for the first verse of the Shema and the first benediction of the Amidah. So how technically, this is a technical law. You say the Shema and you didn't have intention, that's okay. But if you said the first sentence of the Shema and you didn't have intention, you have to repeat it. As well as the first blessings of the Amidah, there are 18 blessings. The first one you have to have intention. If you didn't have intention, you have to repeat. But that's the exception. When it comes to most of the Shema, when it comes to the grace after meals, which is biblical, when it comes to all other blessings, when it comes to the majority of prayer, if your person didn't say it, they have to repeat it. If they did say it and had no intention, that's okay. How come? In other words, ex post facto. In other words, b'di'evad, as if it was already done, it's okay. Thus it is stated at the beginning of chapter 2 of Brachot, up to here, the commandment of intention, kavana, applies. From here on comes the commandment of recitation and so on. So the Talmud basically says the first sentence, the mitzvah is the kavana. After the first sentence of the Shema, just say it. Intention is nice. At the outset, you should have intention, but it's not critical. So why does this make sense? How does this make sense that even when it comes to prayer, to mitzvot that are so spiritual mitzvot, praying to God, you think if I'm praying, I have to have intention. What's the purpose of mumbling, of moving lips? No, moving lips is primary. Why? As we explained in the last 3 chapters, we're going to summarize it here in the second paragraph. The reason is that the neshama needs no tikkun mending for itself by means of the commandments. In other words, why am I praying? In other words, it's a spiritual effect. Your spiritual side, your soul doesn't need perfection. If your soul wanted perfection, your soul would stay in heaven, but has only to draw forth light to perfect the vivifying soul and body by means of the letters of speech, which the nefesh pronounces with the aid of the 5 organs of verbal articulation. In other words, the purpose of creation is that the soul come down and can bring holiness to the body. How? By using its energy for God. How? By articulating with the organs of verbal articulation. Similarly, with the active commandments, which the nefesh, the soul, performs with the aid of the other bodily organs. So that's wonderful. That's a summary. If we needed to summarize not summarize, but it's proving. It's proving the last, well, I guess the first paragraph is proving that this is the case because that's what the law says. And the second paragraph summarizes the last 2 chapters. Purpose of creation, refine the body, make a home for God in this world. You can only do that through action. You need to move those body parts. You need to move those limbs. And even with prayer and with Shema and grace after meals, of course, l'chatchila, at the outset, you should have intention. But if you did not have intention, that's okay. Why? The main thing is moving your lips. But if you sat and meditated for 2 hours straight, but you forgot to move your lips by saying the Shema, sorry, you have to repeat it. So this makes no sense unless you understand the second paragraph, which is you understand that the purpose of creation is to take the energy of the body and use it for holy purposes, because that's how you transform the physical world. And that's how you make a home for God in this world. Okay, now we're done. We're done with the easy part. Now comes the hard part. Nevertheless, okay, let me just give a quick summary, quick summary of what's about to come. He goes into details, and it's back and forth. It's not 100% clear when you read to the casual reader why he needs so many words to express this point. Of course, every word in Tanya is precise. They say Rabbi Shneur Zalman sat 6 weeks in the Tanya to figure out if you should add 1 letter vav, a connecting letter. So everything is precise. So the commentaries in Tanya explain literally every expression of this chapter. But in big picture, we have a statement, a Kabbalistic statement. Kabbalistic statement says as follows. Mitzvah without intention is like a body without a soul. Again, mitzvah without intention is like a body without a soul. What does that mean? Rabbi Shneur Zalman says it cannot mean, he doesn't say it, but what the implication is, cannot mean that a body without a soul is worthless. Because no, we just said the body is primary. The physical mitzvah is primary. What it means is just like the body has life force, but the soul has a lot more life force. So too, the mitzvah the physical mitzvah brings the divine presence into this world. But when you do the mitzvah of intention, you have a much greater element of light in this world. And he introduces 2 Kabbalistic concepts called tzimtzum and hester, concealment and contraction. And just to explain briefly, and then we'll read it inside, we'll see how much we pick up, but briefly, it's like this. Every spiritual world has a different level of concealment. In other words, how much is the divine light concealed? When you get to this physical world, the divine light is concealed to the maximum. Why? Even though you see life, you don't understand that this life comes from God. So the concealment is maximum. Nevertheless, within this world, there's a spectrum of how much energy is in the world. The stone has less energy than the tree, which has less than the animal. Okay? So there's a spectrum of how much light there is, but there's not a spectrum on the level of the lights. In other words, how concealed the light is. So if you want a metaphor, so what is concealment? Concealment would be if you have a window and you put a curtain. And when you put a curtain, some of the light emanates through the curtain, but it's dimmed. Now the question is, how thick is your curtain? How much is the light dimmed? So in this physical world, the curtain is so thick that the light is dimmed so much to the degree that even the little bit of light that enters the room, you don't really understand the nature of this light. So you see life force in this world. You see the tree grows, you see the human being grows, but you don't see that it comes from God. That's because we have a very thick curtain. Okay. Now, if you go to the more spiritual worlds, the curtain becomes smaller and smaller and more transparent. But ultimately, every spiritual world, there is a curtain because creation is a curtain. Okay. So that's what, so in this world, everything has the same amount of, the same curtain. The only thing is, contraction is how big your window is. You can have a small little crack in the wall with a curtain, or you can have a big opening with a curtain. So you can have the same quality of light in the room, because the quality of light is determined by the concealment, by the curtain. But how much light enters the room, that is dependent on how much how contracted the light is. In other words, how big the opening is. And what we're going to say is that in the metaphor would be that the tree has more life than the stone. The animal has more life than the tree. Because the tree has more soul than the stone, and the animal has more soul than the tree. So it has the same amount, the same quality of light. The light is dimmed by all creations in this world, but the amount of light is much more with the soul, with the animal, with the tree, and even more so with the animal. So we're going to say the same thing is with the mitzvah and the intention. Just like we said in this world, all the light is the same because the curtain is the same size. Every mitzvah, there's no curtain. A physical mitzvah, a spiritual mitzvah, you're doing the divine will, there's no curtain. So the quality of light that's in every mitzvah is equal. What is the difference? So we have the metaphor. We said a soul without, we said mitzvah without intention is like a body without a soul, which means the intention is like the soul. What did we say about the soul in this world? The soul of this world, a soul in this world, is the animal, the living being, does not have a greater quality of light than the stone, but it has more quantity. You could see it more. So too, when it comes to the mitzvah, all mitzvot have the same quality of light, which means no curtain at all. This is clearly the divine will. But the amount of light is much more when you speak of the spiritual, when you speak of the mitzvah of the intention. That's, in short, the first thing probably up to after this, we only have like a third left of the chapter. Then it gets a little bit more Kabbalistic. So if this is clear, we'll read it inside. Otherwise, if something that needs a little clarification, please raise it. Not that I guarantee I can clarify it. I already made the confession. I already made the disclosure. I'm not fully sure I understand everything in this chapter. It's a difficult chapter, but I'll be happy to think about it together with you. Otherwise, we'll read it inside. We'll see what we get, and then we'll get to the last section. But in any case, the big picture is clear. The big picture is, yes, action is primary, but that doesn't mean that intention is meaningless, because the more intention you have, the more light you're bringing into this world. Okay, let's see what happens. Nevertheless, it has been said, prayer or other benediction recited without kavana, without intention, is like a body without a neshama, a body without a soul. What does that mean? This means that just as in all creatures in this world, possessing a body and soul, namely the nefesh of all living, and the ruach of all human flesh, and the neshama of all that has spirit of life in its nostrils, among all living creatures, all of which God animates and brings into existence ex nihilo, something from nothing, constantly by the light and vitality which he imbues into them. For also the material body and even the very inanimate stone and earth have within them light and vitality from his blessed self, so that they do not revert to naught and nothingness as they were before. So this point is like this. Here, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying a point that he's going to mention in the second section of Tanya. Every creation must have a constant light of God, must have a constant energy of God recreating it, because the world is something from nothing, ex nihilo, the way the Greeks call it. And therefore, since we're something from nothing, we're essentially nothing. And therefore, you need a divine force to keep everything into existence continually. And what I just said the last 20 seconds is probably the most important Hasidic idea, that there's creation is not in the past, creation is constant and ongoing. So if we get to the second half section of Tanya, after we finish the first 52 chapters, we'll elaborate on that at great length. But here Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying, so everything has light. Even the stone has a soul. This is before science understood that soul is not dead. Soul is, that matter is not dead. There's atoms, there's spinning, there are things that are happening, there's energy, tremendous amount of energy in the matter. But this is, the Kabbalah understood this way before. And what Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying, everything has life within it, both the physical body, both the physical stone, the inanimate, so to the vegetation, and the animal. Nevertheless, there is no comparison or similarity whatever between the quality of the light and the vitality that illuminate the body, and the quality of light and vitality that illuminate the neshama, which is the soul of all living. In other words, he's saying, if you look at the body, the physical body and the physical soul, there's no comparison. What's the physical body? Stone is a physical body. Even a tree, which has sunlight, it's still body. When it comes to the animal is soul. The human being is soul. That's a totally different level. Now we're going to get into that whole thing, which I told you about. The level of light is the same. It's just more. So that's what he elaborates upon now. To be sure, in both, there is identical light. In terms of the concealment of the countenance. In other words, in this physical world, the tree and the stone and the animal, the concealment is the same. In other words, the fact that the divine light is obscured, there's a curtain obscuring the divine light to the extent that you don't realize that it's divine light, that's the same in the stone, in the tree, and in the human, and in the animal, and in the human. Right? And in terms of the identical garments wherein the light hides, conceals, and clothes itself. For both body and soul are of this world, wherein the light and vitality issuing from the breath of his blessed mouth is equally concealed in a general way by virtue of the concealment of the countenance and greater descent. In the progressive lowering of the worlds, by means of numerous and profound tzimtzumim, contractions, until the light has clothed itself in klipat noga, in the unholiness, in order to animate the totality of this material world. That is all things which are permissible and clean in this world, and from it and through it, all things that are impure receive their sustenance. For it is the mediating agent, as it were, as has been explained above and last week as well. So what are we saying? We're saying in this world, everything has light. In this world, there is a level of concealment that is equal in all creations. In all creations, the light is concealed. In other words, think about the metaphor. There is a curtain that obscures the light, and the curtain is very thick. And therefore, even a little bit of light that enters the room, it's concealed. You don't see the nature of the light. You don't realize that it's divine light. Nevertheless, so even though the quality of the light is the same in all creations, nevertheless, the illumination, i.e. the flow of vitality wherewith God illuminates and animates by way of this garment, is not the same for all of them in a manner of contraction and expansion. How much of this light, how much of this veiled light is in this world? Oh, every creation is different. And he elaborates. For in the corporal body and in the actually inanimate object like stones and earth, the illumination is one of the greatest contraction, which has no parallel. There's energy there, but you don't see it. It looks dead. Okay? Where the vitality is so minute as not to have even the power of vegetation. In other words, in Hebrew, vegetation is a translation of someach. It doesn't grow. The stone doesn't grow. Where the vitality, in plants, the illumination is not so greatly contracted. In general, all things are subdivided into 4 grades: mineral, vegetable, animal, and man. Speaker. That comes from the Greek philosophy. Corresponding with the 4 letters of the blessed name, the tetragrammaton, Yud He Vav Ke, from which they receive their influence. Okay. Now we're going to get to the metaphor, to the analog. And just as the illumination and flow of vitality in inanimate and vegetable bear no comparison or parallel with the illumination and flow of vitality, which is clothed in animals and man, although in all these is one equal light, and in the category of concealed countenance, which is clothed in the same garment of them all, namely the garment of Noga. So in other words, just like you cannot compare the life of the energy of the stone to the energy of the animal and human, even though the concealment is the same. In other words, the thickness of the curtain is the same. But nevertheless, with the stone, it's just one drop, one crack of light. And with the animal, with the human being and animal, there's much more light. So too, there is no comparison or parallel between the illumination and flow of the light of the blessed Ein Sof, the inwardness of his blessed will, without concealment of the countenance and without any garment whatever, which irradiates and pervades the active precepts. In other words, so you can't compare the light of God. Remember, this time the light of God has no countenance, has no concealment, because no curtain, because it's divine will. But you can't compare the divine will, which has no curtain, between the active mitzvot, which is the body, and the intentional mitzvot, which is the soul. So the qualitative idea is the same. There's no concealment, but the amount of light is much more with the intention over the action. So here we go. Likewise, in the case of the precepts that depend on verbal articulation and utterance of the lips without kavana, which articulation is regarded as a real action, as mentioned above, by comparison with the illumination and flow of the light of the blessed Ein Sof, which irradiates and pervades the kavana, the intention of the active precepts that a person intends, whilst engaged in performing them, to cleave to him, blessed be he, through fulfilling his will. What's the kavana? What's the intention? Not so much the intention, what's the purpose of the mitzvah? No, intention means I'm doing the mitzvah with the intention of cleaving to God. Inasmuch as he and his will are one and the same. Similarly, in the case of kavana in prayer, the recital of the Shema with its benedictions and all the other benedictions wherein through his intention, kavana, he attaches his thought and intellect to him, may he be blessed. Okay, so that's the point. That's the metaphor. Let me see where we're going to go now. Wait, we still have a way to go. Okay. What have we said? So to summarize, what have we said so far? To summarize, we're basically saying the metaphor. So you have the difference between the quality of light in this world. It's the same for body and soul, for stone and animal. Same quality of light. Light is concealed. You can't see that the light is connected to God. Nevertheless, the stone has very little light, and the animal and human have a lot more light. So there's a veil on the window. But is it a small window or a big window? So too when it comes to the mitzvot, yes. Every mitzvah has no veil. Every mitzvah is clearly connected to God. It's the divine will. It's obvious this is the divine will. But when it comes to how much of the divine will is entering this world, an action mitzvah is smaller. A mitzvah of intention brings a lot more light. And now we're going to say that itself is by the divine will. It's not because it has to be that way. So let's see what he says. Not that an attachment, dveikut of the human thought and intellect to him, blessed be he, is intrinsically superior to the attachment to the performance of the active precepts in actual practice, as will be explained further on. Rather, it is also his blessed will that one should cleave to him with one's intelligence, thought, and intention in the active commandments, and with the intention during the recital of Shema, prayer, and other benedictions, and the illumination of his supreme will, Ratzon Elyon, which irradiates and pervades the kavana, is infinitely greater and more sublime than the illumination of the supreme will, which irradiates and pervades the performance of the commandments themselves in action and speech, but without kavana. It is comparable to the superiority of the light of the soul over the body, which is a vessel and garb of the soul, as the body of the commandments itself is a vessel and garb for the kavana. What I think he's saying is that the fact that you say my mind can cleave to God and that brings more light is not because my mind is somehow intrinsically able to connect to more light of God, because both the action and the human intelligence compared to God is the same, because God is infinite. So the mind can't really grasp the infinity. But Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying that God himself wanted that the dveikut, the cleaving to God through intention, should bring down more light. But it's not intrinsic. It doesn't have to be that way, because the reality is that both our mind and our action are removed from infinity to the same degree, because finite and infinite, there's no comparison. Okay. And although in both of them, in the commandment of the kavana, there is the same will, which is perfectly simple, without any change of multiplicity, God forbid, which is united with his blessed essence and being in perfect unity, nevertheless, the illumination is not the same in respect to the contraction and expansion. In other words, yes, both are the divine will, and the divine will is the same, pshitut. In other words, you can't find differences between mitzvot. All mitzvot are the same. Yeah, all mitzvot are the same. In other words, both mitzvot of action and mitzvot of intention are the same, in that there's no concealment, but they're different in how much light is revealed. We're going to skip the note because the note gets even more Kabbalistic. Now we're going to get to specific. And this is really going to be a little bit of an introduction to next week. What we're going to say is, just like when it comes to the physical world, we said there are 4 levels. there is the inanimate, there is the vegetable. In other words, what did he call the vegetable kingdom? What did he call them? I forgot already. Sameach, the animal, the vegetable that grows, and then there is the animal, and then there's the human. These are the four categories in the physical world, the way the Greeks and therefore their early Jewish philosophers thought about it. We're going to say spiritually, there's the same thing. The physical mitzvot divide into two. Now, just like in the metaphor, stone is primarily body. Tree is primarily body because it grows, but it doesn't have personality, at least not that we know of. Meanwhile, animal and human are primarily soul. And nevertheless, there's an advantage to animal over human. So you can divide these four to two, to the stone and tree, which is primarily body, and animal and human, which is primarily soul. So too with the mitzvot, there are two that really are four. There's the body of the mitzvah, and then there's the soul of the mitzvah. And the metaphor also divides into two, because the body of the mitzvah, there's physical mitzvah, and the soul of the mitzvah is the spiritual. Now, when you look at the body of the mitzvah, there's also two levels, because we said there's action, and then we said there's speech. And we keep insisting that speech is also action, but speech is a little bit more spiritual than action. You're moving your lips, but it's still what you're producing is not something that's tangible. So we say the metaphor is action is like the stone, speech is like the tree, and then when it comes to the intention, we also have animal intention and human intention. What are animals? So it's very interesting. We're not putting down the animals here. Angels are referred to as animals, as we will discuss in chapter 39 and 40, especially 40. When we say animals, we mean emotion by instinct. An animal and an angel love God because that's their instinct. So if you could find the hidden love of God that's in your soul, in other words, you find the place within you that you love God, that's a spiritual mitzvah, that's the level of animal. But if you can be a human being, the way we're defining it, is someone whose mind controls the heart, whose mind can create new emotion, creating emotion by meditation. That's the human being. That's the highest level of intention. And we're going to actually continue on this theme, 39 and 40. These four levels and how they correspond to the two types of emotion. Two types of action and two types of emotion. We're going to elaborate upon this next 2 weeks. But the big idea here is, we're saying that all mitzvot are the same in the sense that it's divine will. But nevertheless, there's a difference of how much divine will. And the metaphor is stone, tree, human being, animal, human being. So too, all the mitzvot are the same amount of divine will. And the metaphor is, but the four levels, how much light is in the world depends on what's the ratio of body and soul here. And body divides into two, soul divides into two. So the physical mitzvah is the stone. The mitzvah of speech, which is more spiritual, but it's still physical because it's still a physical concept. It's not an emotion. You're moving lips. So that is like the tree. And then emotion that is natural is the animal. I love God by instinct. I didn't have to meditate. I just love God. I feel like I love God. Okay, so that's the animal. But then if you can, the highest level is where you regenerate the most light is if you can create an emotion with your intelligence, your meditation. Oh, now you're human. So that's going to be the end of it. That's going to take us to the end of the chapter. So let's make a run for it. And we'll have a few more minutes to see if we can discuss this at all, or if it's good, or we'll come back to it the second time we learn the Tanya. We'll see. But let's see if we can make a run for this. It too, what's it too? The mitzvot too is differentiated into four grades. For the body of the commandments themselves constitute two grades. In other words, the body has two grades, just like the stone and the tree are two levels. So the body of the mitzvot, physical mitzvot, are divided into two. Namely, the commandments involving real action and those which are performed verbally and mentally, such as the study of Torah, reciting the Shema, praying, saying grace after meals, and other benedictions. So that's the body divides into two. An action, or moving my lips. The kavanah of the commandments, i.e. the intention to cleave to him, to his blessed self, being like the soul of the body of the commandments, is likewise subdivided into two grades, corresponding to the two categories of soul which are present in corporal bodies, namely in animals and man, respectively. In other words, just like, so there's two types of soul. There's the soul of the animal and the soul of the human. So too, there's two types of intention. And now we're going to explain what those two types of intention are. In the case of a person who is intelligent enough to know God and to reflect on his blessed greatness, and to beget out of his understanding a lofty fear in his brain, and a love of God in the right part of his heart, so that his soul will thirst for God, seeking to cleave unto him through the fulfillment of Torah and commandments, which are extension and reflection of the light of the blessed Ein Sof onto his soul, thereby to cleave to him. And with this intention, he studies the Torah and performs the commandments. And likewise, with this intention, he prays and recites the blessing. Then the kavana is by way of a simile, like the soul of a human being who possesses intelligence and freedom of choice and speaks from knowledge. In other words, if you can do this, if you can meditate in the greatness of Hashem, create an emotion, which will then motivate action, then you're at the level of human. In other words, then the emotions you created are the soul of a human being because you generated this intelligence through your own meditation. But he whose intelligence is too limited to know and reflect on the greatness of the blessed Ein Sof, so as to beget out of his understanding a conscious love of his heart, and also awe of his mind, and dread of God in his heart. Yet, and this is we actually alluded to this earlier in chapter 18, that everybody has a hidden love, a natural hidden love of God within themselves. So it's an instinctual love. We're going to say, oh, so then that's the level of animal. And by the way, don't get offended because the angels are all in that level. You read the scriptures, the prophets, they refer to and in our prayers we do the same, refers to the angels as holy animals, meaning holy emotional instinct. So we'll elaborate upon that later, like I said, in the next 2 weeks. Yet he recalls and awakens the natural love that is hidden in his heart, bringing it out of his hidden recesses of his heart into the conscious mind at least, so that his will, which is in his mind and which is latent also in his heart, should approve and favor with complete willingness and truthful sincerity that he suffer martyrdom in actual fact for the unity of God. In other words, deep down, the soul has an instinct to be completely devoted to God, even if he has to give up its soul. So that's a hidden love that you have instinctively. If you can bring that to the forefront of your mind, then it's instinctive love. So that's the level of animal. In order to attach to him to divine soul and her garments and unite them with his unity and oneness, namely the supreme will that is clothed in the Torah study and the performance of the commandments, as explained above. And in this natural love, it contains also fear, wherewith to accept his reign and not to rebel against him, God forbid. And with this kavanah, he turns away from the evil and does good, and studies and prays and recites benedictions, following only the plain meaning of the words without conscious fear and love in his heart and mind. This kavana is by the way of the simile, like the soul of a living creature that has no intelligence and freedom of will, whose midot, namely its fear and harmful things and its love of pleasing things, are only natural to it, meaning its instinct, and do not originate in its understanding and knowledge. So by way of example are the natural love and fear, which are latent in the heart of every Jew. So that's instinct, since they are the heritage from our patriarchs, and like a natural instinct in our soul, as has been mentioned above. So that is the big idea here. Just to summarize, we started out the chapter saying, look, the only way you'll understand the halacha, the Jewish law, that action is primary. That reciting the words without intention, you fulfill the mitzvah. But the intention, without the words, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. The only way you can understand that is by understanding the primacy of action, as we described in the last 3 chapters, because the purpose of creation is to affect the body. That was point number 1. Point number 2, we say, however, intention is important. Intention, we mean emotion, meaning I'm doing the mitzvah to connect to God because I really want to connect to God. That is critical. Why is it critical? It's not critical to make the home of God, but it's critical to add additional light, to turn on the light switch. And here we went into a whole thing, and we say, 1 second, so what exactly is happening? Every mitzvah is the same in the quality of light, because this physical world has a thick window shade covering the light. But a mitzvah has no covering. It's clearly the divine will. So every mitzvah has the same level of light. But the question is, how much light? How much contraction and how much expansion? And then we say, if you're doing a mitzvah of action, just like the stone has so much less action, so much less light or energy than the human being, so too the mitzvah of action has less light than the intention. And then we brought that additional point that we said it's not that intention is, okay, so let's get that point. And then we said, you want to get specific? There's 4 levels in creation. There's inanimate, there's vegetation. There is animal and there's human. So too in the mitzvot, you have the 2. So you have 2 which are primarily body and 2 which are primarily soul. So the mitzvot, you have the action mitzvot, which correspond to the stone. You have the mitzvah of speech, which is also like vegetation, because it's also physical, but yet it's a little bit more spiritual. It's moving, it's growing. It's not so locked in its place. It's not so physical in the sense that it's trapped in its dimensions. And then you have, when it comes to the emotion, primarily soul, you have two levels. You have the emotion that is generated by instinct. I find a natural love to God in my soul, as we described in chapter 18, 19, 20, etc. 18, mainly 18 and 19. If I do the mitzvah because of my natural instinctual love to God, I'm on the level of animal, even more light. If I do the mitzvah because I meditate and create an emotion to God through intelligence, then I have even more light, because that's the level of the human, which is whose emotions are not instinctual, but the person could create their own emotion. So that's the story in short. I think I understand it better now that we worked through it. So thank you all for hanging in there while I'm trying to process this information. Wonderful day, wonderful week, wonderful happy Sukkot, great time of the year. Next week, who knows, maybe you can do it in the Sukkah, we'll see. Okay, fine. That's it for today. Questions and comments, as always, welcome. Thank you, Vicky. Go ahead.
Well, I have to thank you for such clear explanation of deep concepts. But I need to confess that we are physical beings. So when listening to that, we're looking for more like tangible results.
Right.
So the effect of this intention, of course, Hashem feels it, but probably felt only by the person actually performing. And probably there is a spectrum also, because the light is the same, but everybody feels it differently. And on a greater scale, do we bring Mashiach sooner if we meditate more and if we have pray more intense?
You have two excellent questions. Let me do the first and then the second. The short answer is I don't know about the first, but let me do the first and the second. There's no question. The question is, remember we said that to bring God into this world, you need fuel. Fuel is the action. Okay, fine, we get that. The question is, this fire of God that now is brought into this world because I did the action, I have the fuel, and I'm the candle, which part of my personality does it permeate? Is it just my hands? Or does it also affect my inner life? So we say, if your emotion is instinctual, I do it because I love God. Why do you love God? I don't know. Okay, so now the divine light is not only in your hands, it's also in your heart. It's also in your emotion. But is it in your intelligence? No, I can't explain it. But if you're at the level of human being, which means you generated meditation, and you understood the greatness of God, like Maimonides describes. Maimonides describes, if you want to love God, think about how great he is. Look at the sciences, look at the universe. And from that, you'll understand the greatness of God. You'll extrapolate the greatness of God. And from that, you'll fall in love with him instantaneously. Well, and then I'm not saying I tried it, but it never happened to me, right? In other words, if you're really an intellectual person, you can do that. If you do that, then where is God in your life? Not only in your action, not only in your emotion, but also in your intelligence, because you understand the greatness of God. So the question, you're right, it's within the person, and as a spectrum of, that's what we're saying, how much did the divine light spread within myself? Is it just at the level of action, or level of vegetation, which is my lips, articulating power, the ability to create speech, which is physical, but less physical than physical action, tangible, but less tangible than action, then, or also emotion. Okay, but emotion, which part of the emotion? Instinctual emotion or intellectual emotion? And the highest level, which means it permeates you completely, is if it gets to the intellectual emotion as well. In other words, it's your mind as well. Emotion created by intelligence. So now it's the mind and the heart. So that's the answer of so God is in your life. There's no question. You're home for God. You do a mitzvah, you're home for God. There's no question about that. The question is, which part of you perceives this home for God? Which part of me appreciates the presence of God? Is it just my action, etc.? The second question is, the short answer is I don't know. I don't know if I can explain it perfectly, because this chapter seems to be saying otherwise. But if you talk about from everything I read in the Hasidic literature, so the way that Rebbe puts it, it seems that no, intention does not bring Mashiach close. Bringing Mashiach is building the home, laying the bricks. Action is laying the bricks. Intention is turning on the light. If you turn on the lights, did you finish the house any sooner? No. But the appreciation, the ability to appreciate the divine presence, when Mashiach comes, today we can't appreciate it, but when Mashiach comes, to be able to sense the divine presence in the world, that happens through our intention. In other words, it's not the same. It's not automatic that if God is in this world, we sense it. It's not automatic because God, you say God is here. How come we can't sense him? Well, simple. Just like the spectrum of light, there's some parts of the light you could see, and the other spectrum of light you cannot see. So something could be here, and I don't appreciate it. Big deal, right? The greatest scientist could be giving a lecture here, speaking words. He's present. His wisdom is here. I can't perceive it. I have no idea what the guy's talking about. For me, he may as well be speaking Japanese. Okay, so it's here. The wisdom is here, but I cannot grasp it. So bringing God into this world is all action, but expanding the light so I can recognize it. That's intention. So does it bring Mashiach closer? No. But does it make that when Mashiach comes, we can appreciate the presence of God? Yes. Now, how could I fit this in every word Rabbi Shneur Zalman says here? I don't know if I could fit it every word he says here, but certainly that's what the subsequent generations of Chabad philosophy, that's how they crystallize it. So that is what the Alter Rebbe meant. What can I see it exactly here? I don't know. If all I knew was 38, I would be a little more confused. Honestly, I would think that no, the more light, the more you're building the home. Just reading 38, that's why I'm struggling with 38. But certainly the way it's later explained and presented in the later sources, it's clear that no, the building is the action. The intention is bringing in the light. I'm building the sukkah now. We thank God have the walls. Hopefully today the roof will go up. After we finish the walls and the roof, we string in the electricity.
Thank you, Rabbi. I guess my understanding is it's not so much of a building, but more of a readiness of individuals to receive that with the coming of Mashiach, right?
But the question is that critical? I have two questions. Is God in your life? Is the divine presence in your life? That's question number one. That question is determined by, are you making fuel? Are you generating fuel? The fuel is action. Then there's a separate question. Am I aware of that presence of God? That is a separate question. For that, you need intention.
Thank you, Rabbi. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Because like I said, this could not do this without you. That I guarantee you. I've been walking around for a few days confused, but now at least it's crystallized and sharpened. So thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful day. Happy Sukkot. Happy Shabbat. Sukkot's not Sunday night. 7 days of joy. Don't forget to be joyous. And like Bob said, Sukkah is about the awareness that the joy should be felt, not just hidden in the recesses of the heart, but the joy should be felt. Okay. Wonderful day. Wonderful Shabbat.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.